Okay, today we're going to talk about plot, how to understand the different parts of the plot, and also how to recognize them in a story. The first thing we're going to do is go over a couple of important definitions for this particular lesson. I know you've seen them before, but it always pays to review. So the first is plot, which is the series of episodes or events that make up a story. The second is conflict. This is the problem that moves the story forward as the protagonist or main character tries to overcome that problem. And finally, we have the resolution. This is the end of the conflict. The protagonist's life returns to normal, but they have learned something or changed as a result of the conflict. Remember, it helps to remember that the resolution of the story is the solution to the problem. Let's start with a visual story so that we can just do a little practice. So I'm looking at these images and thinking about what series of episodes lead up to this last image. So when I look at the first picture, I'm noticing, okay, we have a big ship, maybe even a cruise ship, and it looks like it's being tossed around in a storm and it is in danger of wrecking on an island. When I look at the second picture, I'm guessing these are survivors of that cruise ship wreck. I can tell this because they're in very torn clothing. They're standing clearly on the beach. There's some water in the background, and they're carving out SOS in big letters in the sand. And I can use my background knowledge or my schema to remember that SOS was a term that was used to mean help. It's like a shortened abbreviation of it. So since they're digging it into the sand really big, I'm thinking perhaps that they want an airplane that's flying over to see that someone's there and needs help. In the last picture, I see a message in a bottle that says help, and there's a little thought bubble at the top that says, there it goes, our last chance for rescue. That makes me think that perhaps an airplane was unable to rescue them. Maybe one didn't fly over. And this is kind of a last-ditch effort, hoping that somebody will find their message. So in most stories and plays, one event leads to another, unfolding in a way that increases tension and builds up to a turning point called the climax. The moment of greatest suspense, surprise, or excitement. That's the climax. So I want you to think of a plot as a roller coaster ride. The events move you up, up, up until you reach the very top or the climax, and then they send you zooming down through the falling action to the story's resolution or end. So if we look back at our visual story that we're practicing with, we could start with exposition. That's the opening of the story. I might say a group of people are on a cruise in the ocean. That kind of sets the scene for our story. Next, the conflict or the inciting incident. What disturbs the normal everyday life in the beginning of the story to set us on our path? In this case, a storm at sea causes a boat to crash on the rocks of a tiny island. Next, we have the rising action. Search planes miss the island despite the survivors' efforts to signal for help. This is going to lead us to our climax. Supplies are running out, and as a last resort, the survivors send a message in a bottle, hoping to get help. The falling action is a fisherman from a nearby island finds the bottle. This is not the resolution because remember, the problem is that they are stuck on this island. Their supplies are running out. So the fisherman just finding the bottle doesn't solve their problem. So it's the falling action. We're almost to that resolution or solution, which is the fisherman rescues the survivors. Finds the bottle, he goes to the island, he rescues the survivors. That ties up the loose ends of our story, and it also solves the problem. So this is a visual example of the plot of a story. We have our exposition, our conflict, our rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Up next, we're going to practice this together with a written story example. Before I start this next part, as if I had students, I just want to show you really quickly how I use Pear Deck to get feedback. So when I would start this lesson in Pear Deck, I'm choosing instructor paste, activity. The students would go, and I'm going to create another tab as if I'm a student. So the students would go to what is called join, or the website joinpd.com. And they would put in this join code. The join code is QUHESD. So if I were a student, I would go to joinpd.com. And then I would be able to see my teacher's code, which is QUHESD. So I'd put that in. You can do a little check-in on how they're feeling today, which is always helpful to know what headspace your students are in. And then it's going to bring them right up to where I am in the lesson. So I see, let's say I had 20 students. It would say 20 students connected. I'd see I'm ready, so I can get rid of that. And I can continue with my lesson. And so that's where I'm going to go from here. I'll toggle over to the student screen just to show you what that would look like as well. Okay, now we're going to work on recognizing parts of the plot together using an excerpt. This particular excerpt is called Alma's First Cattle Drive. It is historical fiction, and it is by Nancy Segal. I'm going to read, and I would like for you to read along as I go. So on the student screen, they would be seeing the same thing. Blinding light flashed across the sky, followed by deafening thunder and driving rain. Alma had grown up listening to her father's astounding stories of cattle drives. She had always wanted to join in, but her father told her she wasn't ready. Now, he was finally giving her the chance to prove to him that she would be more help than trouble on the trail. This was her first cattle drive, and the weather was Alma's first challenge. When they reached the river, Alma instantly noticed that the water was dangerously high. When the cattle had begun to cross a shallow spot, Alma was the only one to notice a calf getting swept up in the current. Alma charged into the water and stopped her horse downstream from the calf to keep it from losing its footing. So, students, I want you to think about, how does the story's plot build to a climax here? One plot episode, remember, leads to the next until Alma must act. The critical moment is going to be that climax. So use this plot diagram to help you finish mapping out the plot. We already have the exposition. Alma goes on her first cattle drive, but a terrible storm has made it dangerous. And the conflict. Alma struggles to prove herself to her father and keep the animals on the cattle drive safe. I want to know what the rising action is, and I want to know what the climax is. So I kept the little excerpt up for you to read, but I want you to go ahead and add these two answers in for me. Now, what's really cool for the students is on their screen, they have a place to put the answer. And what I usually ask them to do is to label their answers. So they would put rising action and their answer. And once they put their answer, they would put climax and their answer. So from my screen, I can now look at their responses. Once I've noticed, like this says 1 of 1 response is done. So even if it wasn't the full 20, they can keep writing when I look at responses. And what's neat is it doesn't give student names. So that way students don't have to worry about getting the wrong answer. They can be confident to just put their answer up anonymously. But when I finish the lesson and I end it and save my changes, I, as the teacher, can go back and look at each individual student response, know who understood and know who didn't. So at this point, I would go through their answers and we would discuss which answers were correct, make sure everybody was on the same page, and then I would stop showing responses and we would move on. I want you to read this next part of the story and think about which sentence best shows the resolution of the story. Remember, this resolution is the solution to the problem. Alma stayed in there Alma stayed there in the stinging rain, her horse breathing hard beneath her. She was cold and hungry, but she kept her horse on the edge of the shallow riverbank until each animal had safely passed. When she finally rode ashore, her father waved to get Alma's attention. He paused for just a moment to tip his hat to her before they continued. Alma knew then that she had proven herself to be a valuable member of the team. So I want you to go ahead and choose an answer choice option that tells you which sentence best shows the resolution of the story. And again, from the student's perspective, they would see what I just read, and they would also have answer choices. So they could look through the answer choices and choose whichever one they think is correct. And then I can see from my side, when I show responses, the answer that each student has chosen. What's really great is it'll tell me a tally of who chose what. So I can just tell a quick overview. Is most of the class getting this? Are they confused? And we can address it right there. And again, when I end the lesson, I can see individual answers, which is going to help me figure out who needs reteaching, who needs just a little bit more targeted interventions, and who's got it and is ready to move on. I would hide my responses. And our final exit ticket question for this mini lesson is explain how you could tell which choice was the resolution to the story. So think back to the answer that you just chose as the resolution and explain to me, how did you know that was it? This is a great open-ended question that the students get to answer. And the reason why I think it's important is because this tells me if they conceptually understand. It also is going to be a really effective way for me to see misconceptions so that I can even better target learning and differentiate. And once again, I can show my responses. That would be the end of the mini lesson. And when I click end, I can name it. So I could say read 1, for example, save and end session. And I could go back later and look at their answers and see individual student responses to help me differentiate for future teaching. Hi again. Once I've finished a lesson like this and I have looked over the data that I collected using Pear Deck, I would break students up into small groups and work with them on their instructional level texts to ensure that they were able to chart these different parts of a plot. So for advanced students or students who are right on grade level, this would look like reading either a fiction book of their choice where they then chart the different plot points, or I would choose a 6th grade level text that we would read together and chart the plot points. This would look very different for students who are either not understanding the concept or reading below grade level. We would choose a text that is on their instructional reading level in small groups so that they would be able to grasp the text and not struggle with the words and language and just focus on being able to address the plot points. For students that are struggling, I would give them a graphic organizer. I would have them highlight in specific colors. What is the conflict highlighted on the story in green? What is the resolution? Highlight that in orange. Using something like Kami, or we could just have them underline it. Both have worked very well in the past. And then discuss in small group to make sure that they are understanding and continue with gradual release of responsibility and more practice if they're not. Thank you for this opportunity to interview, and I look forward to hearing from you.